fabulous experts. But before we start, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. So if we can move on to the next slide. A reminder that Partner TechX are the only place where you will be able to review all of the most amazing technology that's being developed to run our channel programs. Will be happening on the 16th to the 18th of March next year at the Sheraton Grand in Phoenix, Arizona. Wonderful location, wonderful hotel, but much more important than that, some absolutely incredible partner technology that's going to be shown, that's going to really help define the way we work with our partners moving forward. Click on the QR code at the side there and you'll be able to register for the event. Moving on, we want this to be as interactive as we can possibly make it. You have a chat button at the bottom there. Please feel free to join in the chat, ask questions of me, ask questions of the panelists, and also ask questions of your fellow colleagues who are on the webinar. So we have 4 panelists this afternoon. I am going to introduce each of them in turn, and starting with James. James founded his first company at the age of just 20. Following a journey that lasted over 2 decades, that company would eventually grow and evolve to become Web Infinity, which was acquired by 360 Insights in 2022. He's the SVP of Ecosystems at 360 Insights, and in that role, he's solidified 360 as a leader in ecosystem orchestration. Perfect for this webinar, empowering enterprise to connect, automate, and optimize their partner ecosystems at scale. As you'll tell from the accent, James was born in the UK, but he grew up living in Bangladesh, Thailand, Jamaica, and South Africa, and now calls Huntington, New York, his home. So, James, tell us a little bit about 360.
Yeah, hi Rod, great to be here. I'm very excited for the topic. So yeah, 360 Insights kind of on a mission, I think, to really try and crack the code around how do you scale the practice of ecosystem orchestration. And for that, really, I think you need a combination of elements. It's all about unification of strategy, tools, experience, processes, into one platform. Incentives are a huge part of this. How do you actually drive then repeat the behaviors you want to see that are going to impact the success of your ecosystem, and also the extension, to really work, with the best breed solutions and service providers in the industry. So at 360, we're on a really interesting mission to bring it all together to solve this very hard challenge of channel and ecosystem scale, and really excited to be working with, so many great collaborators and clients in the industry. Amazing.
Fabulous. And our second panelist is Carlin Bentley. She's Group SVP of Client Partnership at Ansira. There, she's accountable for growth, retention, and overall health across a portfolio of enterprise accounts within not just tech, but also telco, insurance, financial services, and healthcare. She leads executive relationships and cross-functional orchestration, strategy, ops, product tech, etc., to translate client and partner needs into programs that drive pipeline performance, and most important of all, ROI. Her focus areas include channel and partner programs, incentives, MDF and campaign activation, and go-to-market accelerations. She's recognized for pragmatic, client-first leadership and accountable results. She lives in the city of Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters and enjoys traveling, cooking, and spending summers at the lake. Carlin, tell us a little bit about Ansira.
So related to this topic, when we talk about ecosystems at Ansira, we mean it in 2 ways, right? So first, from a client perspective, our role is really to operationalize those ecosystems. So a lot of companies talk about ecosystem strategy, at a high level, but the real challenge, I think, and where Ensira comes in is turning that vision into something that actually works. So we at Ensira connect the data, the marketing technology, and those incentive structures that are needed across the brand and local journey so that ecosystems are just designed on paper, but they're executed, measured, and scalable. And I think, the other side of the coin is that we also rely on our own partner ecosystem. So like James said, we need that to strengthen our go-to-market, and we rely on that. We have a curated set of technology and service partners that extend our platform and service capabilities. And we're always evaluating new partners to ensure we're orchestrating the right mix of solutions to support our clients' needs. So we know in this day and age, you don't always build, but the route to kind of forming that ecosystem and kind of consistently reevaluating that is important. So it isn't just a hypothetical concept for us ecosystems. It's both the system that we help clients run and the system we operate within to deliver value to them. So I'm really excited to be here. So thanks, Rod.
My pleasure. And our third panelist is Curtis Brinkerhoff. And Curtis has started multiple companies in various industries. He's been leading revenue growth and GTM strategies for over 15 years and has a passion for building lasting companies, sales strategy, and winning teams. He also loves to travel the world and started a non-profit called Giving is Living due to seeing potential to help in developing areas, and was once quarantined for suspected Ebola virus on a flight back from Africa. So, Curtis, hopefully you got over that, and tell us a little bit about InPartner.
Yeah, quite a fun experience to be hauled off a plane with people in full bodysuits. I gotta tell you that, Rod, for sure. But InPartner is really here to focus on how we create credibility behind ecosystem models and create, continuous revenue go-to-market strategy in overall ecosystems involving distribution, hyperscalers, and how you have reliable data models behind that. Because if we can get to the complexities of that data and how to create those models, we can start to drive automation behind them. And AI is really built on a foundation of good data that's usable and the infrastructure behind it, right? So we're focused on how to build that in all the ecosystems that we're dealing with. So excited to be here.
Excellent, thank you. And Reagan, our final panelist, Reagan Wilson. And for over 2 decades, Reagan has been redefining channel ecosystems, driving bold strategies and automation that keep her partners ahead of the curve. As VP of Ecosystem Solutions and Innovations at Spur Reply, Reagan leads a powerhouse team focused on channel platform optimization and automation, delivering cutting-edge solutions that elevate partner programs. She has a deep expertise in channel infrastructure, program automation, and partner enablement, and is the go-to leader for turning complexity into competitive advantage. Reagan, tell us a little bit about Spur.
Well, Spur Reply, we are your go-to-market ecosystems consulting firm. So we don't just help our clients get their partners from point A to B. We build the highway, the program strategy, install the toll booths, the partner tech stack, and then we throw in a few fun roadside attractions to keep things interesting. Think AI and marketing enablement. But our rich experience across those capabilities come with a twist. We make channel ecosystems that actually work. And our superpowers are a partner-first approach and a relentless focus on results. We're experts in AI, partner experience optimization across the various platforms in the tech stack, partner marketing and enablement, and revenue acceleration. So in short, we facilitate revenue growth through industry-leading digital experience, program design, because the program matters, and partner marketing execution.
Fabulous. So I'm going to chip in with the obvious first question. If you ask 15 people to define ecosystems, you're going to get 20 answers. So very succinctly, if each of you could tell me what you would define as an ecosystem. And Reagan, you are front and center on my screen at the moment. So ecosystems, how would you define it?
How would I define it? Well, since we work across hundreds of different clients and companies, I think it's defined differently for everyone. So when we talk to our clients about their ecosystem, we're asking them, which players do you have? What are their go-to-market selling motions? Are they sales activities? Are they service activities? Are they building technology alongside you? Are they advising? Kind of bucketed into those four areas. So when we're defining an ecosystem, we're asking, who the people in your ecosystem. It could be all of those. You might have some variance in there as well, but your ecosystem is likely to be slightly different than maybe even your closest competitor, and that's okay. But it does matter to understand who you're working with, and then we think of it as having a maturity level or readiness level across those different go-to-market motions. You might have one of those motions that's a stronger play than another, and your readiness and your maturity might be higher in that motion versus another one. And when we think of the ecosystem holistically, we want to be addressing all of those partners or those ecosystem types, maybe not evenly, but we want to make sure that we're looking at them in the way that they go to market and how they're successful and how they want to be successful.
Excellent. And Curtis, ecosystems, quick definition for you.
Yeah, so for me, quite simply, it's interconnected people and companies that collaborate to create a greater value to an end customer, end user, or end business. How you're making that easy and facilitating that collaboration. So for me, it's fairly simplistic in that nature of how do we come together to add greater value and support the person that needs our assistance.
Excellent. And Colin, switching around slightly, I'm looking at ecosystems. Obviously, my company's saying, okay, you're looking at that. What are the benefits? So what benefit does an ecosystem strategy bring to a company?
I think there's quite a few benefits. I think, I think the more important thing is just making sure that whatever that strategy is, to Regan's point, because it does vary, right, depending on your organization, is that the partners are aligning to that strategy. So you have to make sure that you're, presenting, clear goals and priorities and, value propositions of that ecosystem and where each of those partners kind of play. So I think for like technology clients, enablement ensure or things like enablement and other things I think we're going to get into a little bit ensures that partners know what accounts to target, for example, and what products to prioritize and how their incentives are tied to desired outcomes. So I think the strategy is key, and I think that's where everything starts, but it could be variable, right, depending on where you are at within your maturity as an organization, where you're trying to grow, etc.
Okay. And James, if I can bring you in, ecosystems, we could go on, adding and adding and adding people, adding companies. How do you define who should be part of your ecosystem? I'm looking at it. Who should be the key? Where should the key elements be?
Well, I think part of it is going back to a question of definition, and one of the viewpoints we take at 360 is actually the ecosystem is every single entity and individual who's connected to your organization. So if you're a owner of an ecosystem, our clients, they have employees, they have partners, they have influencers. There's other ecosystems that interact with their ecosystem. So the question here is, you have the ecosystem that you've already built. How do you then prioritize how to strengthen and enhance your go-to-market by extending it in the right areas, right? So I think the first thing you've got to say is you're responsible for looking after all the constituents, and you've got to understand how do the sellers now interact with the partners, how do partners interact with each other. All of it's connected, and I think the systems to support the ecosystem by definition now have to be connected. You shouldn't have partners in a PRM system, sellers in a sales enablement system. But in terms of defining who you should go after, this goes back, I think, to Regan's point about what is your go-to-market strategy, what are your key strategic priorities in terms of growth, retention, etc., and how do you use the ecosystem you either have or can build to achieve those business goals? And it should all be centered around that motion.
Fabulous. And Curtis, okay, you're part of my ecosystem, but I'm kind of looking at you and going, yeah. So what are the gives and the gets? How do you define what you need to give to your ecosystem partners and what you expect from them? And I understand that's going to be different for every type of ecosystem partner, but how do I assess that? How do I say, hey, This is what I'm giving you. This is what I expect in return.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things in my mind, Rod, for that is to break ourselves away from the thought of, gift cards, incentives, or other spiffs or things like that, because those will come with success. But fluidity of business is what I think we really have to create in terms of how do we begin to drive the value proposition. The gives and the gets are mutual benefits for us to go to market together to create more opportunity and to think on how we actually serve, right? That definition of ecosystem is how do we work together to create value? So, what's the value that we're creating, and how are we going to enable fluidity of business? And then there's an expectation of how we collaborate, how we work together, and how we're going to share information. Because if we can't share information and we can't share data, it's very difficult to drive to the next level, which is successful outcomes to go beyond that. So initially, in my mind, is looking at how do we overlap, how do we collaborate, how do we create that value proposition, and where are we going to share so that we can get to that next level. So that would be my entry point to begin with.
Excellent. And Carlin, we're dealing with very large organizations. They've got information all over the place. They've got fragmented partner systems, data silos. Part of building an ecosystem is pulling these things together. What's your advice? Where do you start and how do you begin to make it all work?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think one of the biggest barriers to operationalizing ecosystems is definitely integration. So I think if you can kind of pinpoint those areas and where those can be successes, I think that's a starting point. So that could be, requiring and aligning on like data flows between and across systems, shared KPIs, tech compatibility, I think is also important. Because you need to make sure your product and the solutions that are kind of supporting and driving and kind of fueling that ecosystem can function. I think, from our perspective, we really focus on connecting like through channel incentives and MDF, as well as localized marketing execution, so that it's all kind of within a singular solution so that you can operationalize ecosystems at scale. And I know you want examples, so I do have one, Rod, if you would like one. So So I'm thinking of, one in particular for one of our technology accounts. So obviously, when you're working with them, enabling partner and channel programs, they must align incentives and co-marketing for growth, right? So you also want to make sure that you're driving the right outcomes and they're not just revenue related in this day and age. We're talking about all the different types of partners and how they play and support the ecosystem. So I recall like a cybersecurity company wanted their partners to focus on not just renewals or not just net new transactions, but also renewals and cross-selling. So we basically built a layer on top of an existing program that includes spiffs tied to specific motions, so technical certifications, deal reg, things like that. And then we tiered those rewards and aligned them to those various partner roles that we see within an ecosystem. So think about your resellers and your MSPs and your distributors. And then from there, we basically centralized all that claiming and the payout workflow into that single engine that was already kind of operationalizing the MDF program. And then, the outcome there was just incentives reinforced the ecosystem strategy and drove those behaviors that mattered most. So in addition to those revenue margin rebate type things, we also had these layers integrated within the existing program that really drove those outcomes and those behavior changes.
Brilliant. Reagan, your group pulls a lot of this together. That means pulling multiple different departments in a customer together. What's your advice for someone who's trying to do this? How do you get all those people around the table agreeing what needs to be done and pulling it together?
Well, it's funny you asked that. I had a conversation with a client just this week, and I said, we have to go from thinking about an us versus them. They were talking about different organizations within their company and start thinking about we internally. So it's really thinking about ecosystem support holistically as a we internally. And I mean, from a marketing standpoint, from a sales and operations standpoint, you name it, legal, everyone has to be rowing in the same direction. And one of the things that prevents that we see often is these different silos within an organization buying a bunch of technology that they want to use to support whatever initiative they have, instead of kind of going up a level and looking at that partner experience across the ecosystem holistically and working internally to solve that holistically for partners. And so we are continually being brought in by clients to try to do rationalization and consolidation around systems and tools, because we now have this Venn diagram of all these platforms and tools that are overlapping in all these different ways, and the partner experience is completely disjointed. We're working with a big security company right now, and I have the quote from yesterday, and she said, "This is the worst partner experience I've ever seen." And I mean, and going through it, I kind of have to agree. And you wouldn't expect that from this level of a company, but it comes from these silos internally doing what they think is best to serve their need and not looking at the ecosystem holistically. And I think we have to be thinking about it holistically across those different motions and making sure we have all the right things in place, but not just doing things in our natural silos to try to solve our problems, because it becomes unruly, unmanageable, and so disjointed that you end up either doing a bunch of manual work internally to support it, or your partners just give up and go to someone else in the ecosystem that's easier to do business with.
So if you look at the internal infrastructures you're dealing with at the companies, how do you pull that together? Do you need a very senior sponsor within the company saying, we have to make this happen? And typically, how do you bring that person on board? How do you identify who they are?
That's a good question. I mean, where we're seeing the transformation happen is when someone new comes in, and that maybe that channel chief seat, and they look at the kind of the mess that they've come into, and they say, whoa, guys, we got to do better. Well, sometimes what helps them is having that independent third party. I mean, the fact that there's no politics when you bring in a consulting firm. We don't care. We don't like marketing this person more than that person. And so sometimes we can flatten that noise internally and just talk about what's best based on our decades and decades of experience and hundreds of successful clients. And so that helps us, kind of get the internal minutia off the table and really get people rolling up their sleeves and kind of locking arms and saying, we're going to do this together. And I do think it starts with having some sort of internal sponsor that has some pull, some budget, and can make things happen.
Excellent. And James, we're beginning to pull our internal team together. We've now got all these other ecosystem members who not only have diverse systems, but diverse maturity, diverse capabilities. What's your advice? How do we bring those people into our ecosystems? What do we try and do in terms of matching their and integrating their technology with ours? And where do we just go, hang on, this is as far as we can go here?
Yeah, so I think again it comes back to the context. So again, we established earlier, if you're responsible for an ecosystem and you're an orchestrator of that ecosystem, you have to have a center to it, I think, right? So whilst there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate with others, if you are the owner of the ecosystem, it's on you to do an effective job of orchestrating the success and the scale of it. But it has to be linked to those business priorities. And again, this, I think, links back a little to what Reagan was saying about the buyer persona. If you're in partner marketing, say, or you're a leader of partner demand generation, you are the owner of orchestrating that part of the challenge. You might not have the overarching responsibility for every part of the business, but you have to try and link your objective to the corporate objective of your organization. So if the goal next year is let's grow X hundreds of millions of revenue, how much of that can we achieve by working with our partners to build pipeline and demand generation and co-selling to the customers? So I think when it comes to the question you asked about systems, you then have to think about systems through that lens, right? Because there are best of breed architectures and platforms in the industry that can help with, for example, that particular partner sourced revenue objective. So you have, leaders like Crossbeam who do network data mapping. You have leaders like Structured who do AI personalization of marketing and demand generation assets. And, you have leaders like 360 who do incentives to drive that behavior. What we've done is brought it all together, right? We've created an orchestrated ecosystem of compatible technologies and strategic blueprints, which enables the client to not necessarily have to put the jigsaw together themselves, working with all of these messy integrations. We're making the recipes first and bringing them to organizations and saying this could all work as one thing. But we can help you with the challenge you described about how do you get these different touch points so that the best network infrastructures can work with your private infrastructures. How do you deal with even the basics like single sign-on? How do you get everybody into one experience? How do you measure against business results, not a feature functionality contest? And then crucially, how is the AI all going to work if it's in 10 different or 200 different systems, right? You've got to think about the orchestration of AI and business intelligence too, right? Because if everybody builds amazing AI, it doesn't matter unless it all works together. So I think there is a major challenge for the ecosystem orchestrator, but the good news is there are technology blueprints to help you succeed in this era that just didn't exist, and we're at the forefront of a lot of that thinking.
Excellent. And Curtis, picking up on what James just said, and feeding you probably the most difficult question, gaze into your crystal ball. How do you think AI is going to impact what we're trying to do here? And where do you see people starting to use AI to begin to bridge the complexity of their ecosystems and their ecosystem strategy?
Yeah, well, I mean, AI is all over, and you never get on a webinar without hearing about it, right? But James just hit on a number of factors, and one of the things I challenge people to do is to get out of a portal frame of mind, right? For years, people have always talked about portals, but we've tried for years to take portals and turn them into something that creates revenue that's not tied to business operations and systems. Working with Reagan on a project right now where significant IT resources have been utilized to try to create partnership models for different partnership types, MSPs, resellers, etc. And they've tried to hack that together in a system that's not purpose-built for partner go-to-market strategy. And so when you look at how you have to structure an AI model, you have to build based on a unified data foundation and then apply AI for persona-based utilization. And in a partner ecosystem, that's significantly more challenging. So if you can get out of a portal frame of mind and start to really collaborate with your business, various stakeholders, like Reagan mentioned, to think about how things are going to ultimately downstream be trackable, reportable, traceable, but then enabled against AI so that we can deliver personalized AI approaches because we're all creating AI, right? Everyone's trying to develop AI agents and models within their solutions, but to deliver that at a personalized level, you have to have a unified data foundation to do that. And that's going to significantly shift how content is created, like Carlin mentioned, how spiffs and incentives are done, how they're done in a regionalized approach in business models. And that ties to every single person on this panel today, along with yourself, Rod, because all of it is going to be driven at the individual user across the different geographies, but it all starts with getting out of that portal frame of mind and figuring out how we collaborate in an actual go-to-market strategy. So
Fabulous. And Carlin, companies focus a lot, exactly as Curtis said, on partners, partner types, but they really don't spend enough time on the underlying partner systems. What have you seen? What have you been able to do to begin to organize that so that companies really can adopt an ecosystem approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of ways, but I mean, I know you guys brought up AI, so I guess we have to start talking about AI a little bit. So, I definitely think, we're starting to see easier ways to really analyze and understand in real time the impact partners are having, right, within your ecosystem and also bottlenecks and things like that within the platform itself. So I think those go hand in hand, right? So from a platform perspective or from a roadblock perspective, we may see, some lack of engagement, right? Or we may see some challenges with payouts within a specific region. And so those are clearly kind of being communicated to us internally so that we can really focus in on those bottlenecks and address those challenges immediately. Um, I do think from just a reporting standpoint and how we're helping our clients kind of further understand, the impact of their ecosystem and where they could potentially focus on. I think areas that can be leveraged, using AI include things like easily able to identify high value and underperforming partners right away, right? You've set those KPIs, you've set those metrics, and again, within real time, just seeing that line of sight. I think also it is also helping us predict more. So, based on how partners are growing, from a sales perspective in a rebate program, you can kind of future predict where they'll end up from a tiering perspective. And so we're able to kind of nudge and provide that future kind of, picture to them. And that can enable them to kind of push a little faster to maybe hit that tier or hit that goal. So I think there's a lot of ways that it can be applied to reporting. And then we're also using it internally to monitor, and then our clients are using it to monitor the health of their programs as well as it relates to ecosystems.
Excellent. And Reagan, we're beginning to build things out. What about communication with our ecosystem partners? How do we keep them engaged and involved in what we're doing? What's the experience you've seen? What actually really works?
Well, you've got to deliver what they need where they need it. So it could be push notifications, it could be emails to the partner from a communication standpoint, but ultimately you want to drive them to the place that they're most comfortable with. I think we have to make sure that we're really direct and specific. One of the words I really love is hyper personalized or hyper personalization. Partners don't want to weed through your noise. So if you've got a partner newsletter, you give them the ability to fine tune that in a way that they can pick and choose when they get it, what they get, so that when they get it, they know that it's aligned with what they want. I know that there's people on this call today that have tools like that. It's meeting them where they're at with the tools that they want and communicating in a way that makes sense for them and making sure that that communication is dialed in, right? The last thing that your partners want is a bunch of information that doesn't apply to them. And we're really coaching our clients along the path of this hyper personalization. Gone are the days where you can just have kind of a one size fits all model, back to the kind of where we started with dialing in who your ecosystem is and identifying the players. You have to make sure you understand what their business model is from their standpoint, not yours, what their go to market is, what they care about, because it might not be the same. The days of everybody caring about a financial incentive are somewhat gone. I know for us, like we partner with a lot of technology vendors, and we don't take any money from anyone. There's no referral, anything. Like there are sales motions in which people don't want financial incentives. So if that's your only go-to-market strategy, you probably need to look to something else in 2026 because not all of your partners even care about that. They want attach rate to service, they want renewals, they want longevity at a client. Like you have to really dial into your ecosystem to understand what their care abouts are. And we've seen this shift, there's transition over and over and over again. I've been doing this for way too long, but I've seen really big pivotal shifts in time. We went from the days of box building, like people don't build computers anymore, right? There was a shift from that value added resale and what that looked like to what it looks like today. So you've got to be dialing in your programs and then automating along those lines of the programs to meet the partners where they are in the world that they live in and aligning those incentives and the communication plan with where partners are.
Excellent. And James, we've had a great question coming in from Matthew. I know Curtis mentioned a unified data platform, but are we seeing individual platforms or companies build their AI agents and solutions with more open protocols to help drive insights across the stack versus just an agent that operates exclusively within their platform? So, James, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really interesting territory because I've lived in this world of personalization and cross-functional application design for a long time, right? It was a passion of why I started the company Web Infinity. And a lot of it's about complexity of supply and demand. How do you take an individual who has very specific needs, there's governance around that person, what they can and can't do, what they're interested in, etc. And then you have all of the supply to that demand, which is all the tools, the applications, the data sources, the content. The methodology to manage all of that at scale is extremely complex, and it takes very deep automation technology. One of the challenges in the previous era was it also takes a lot of manual effort, right? Because you have to tag and put a lot of intelligence around content. You have to create a lot of permissions around systems. So the first thing we've seen with AI, and I'm going to use AI orchestration as the word, is a lot of the manual stuff is going away very fast, right? Because you can suddenly start to index and understand and characterize content and systems in a way which wasn't possible. But you still have to live, particularly in the next 2 to 3 years, in the hybrid model of transactional systems that have a lot of structure combined with fluid AI and generative systems, which have not that much structure, but have a lot of challenges around guardrails and how is it going to work around where it gets the data. So there are companies that are starting to help build the new infrastructures to help drive the augmentation of AI. I would look at ServiceNow as a prime example of this, and I would think one of the things that's interesting there is that they're not trying to build the LLMs. They're looking at the orchestration of multiple LLMs, agents that can work together. So, for example, a personalization capability like ours, that works beautifully with an AI orchestration capability that can truly understand the context of the AI conversations and crucially the data governance and security around what it can and can't do. Because one of the biggest problems everyone's having with B2B AI is not the potential, it's the execution, right? How do I really get this out, make it work, and deliver it securely? How are you going to get that through an IT or infrastructure review board if you can't guarantee those things? So the new infrastructures that support that are going to be the winners in the ecosystem automation era, and it's not the traditional systems like CRM, CPQ that are going to do it. It's these new breed infrastructures, and that's what we should all be thinking about.
Yeah, I love that, James. From a reply standpoint, that's our parent company is AI first. I mean, we have multiple companies in the reply network that are focused on AI. And to Matt's question, I think what we're seeing coming out of those companies and what they're doing across some of our customers is very much taken up a level. It's not, building it within a tool to serve that tool. It's AI on steroids that's looking across systems and platforms and pulling that information together. But when it comes to AI, it all starts with the data. And when we're working with a lot of customers, the data isn't great, or there's multiple partner accounts and who gets what, and this ecosystem account looks like that. So I think we get there eventually. We have to have the foundational elements in place to get there. So it's like ready your data, ready your systems, and then think about where you want to set things. And oftentimes the safest place is to start internally versus externally. So how can you optimize what your internal account managers are doing to serve up, like Carlin said, underperforming partners they can reach out to and start to put things in front of. What can you do that's less risky, that doesn't, maybe within internal systems or agents that are already available within the tool set that you have that have passed security reviews before you layer things on top, because it does go through a different set of rigor and justification and security review when you start stacking things on top of each other.
I agree, Regan. I think source governance is critical, and I feel like we're seeing a lot of folks kind of dabble outside of guardrails. When it comes to AI, I think everyone's interested in seeing it and hearing it, but I think you have to create those playgrounds that are kind of gated so that you make sure that that data is accurate, that it's compliant, and that the right people are accessing it as well. So we actually use Glean. We've been piloting it for 6 months now, I think. Some of our clients are actually using it as well. And we started small, we started with, basically whatever access we had within our, SharePoint and Jira and whatever else, we have access to from a marketing standpoint. And there we cascaded it out. But I think it's important to kind of create that committee and that safe space to kind of like play and kind of interact and kind of expand on it. And then from there, you can kind of start cascading it outward, right? It's not just a one and done type of thing or like a short term type of concept. It constantly is reviewed, optimized, voted on, right? And, combating from a hallucination standpoint, right? Like all of those things are important. And it's only as good as the feedback that you give it as well. And then again, the source governance, right?
I think we often
Excellent.
look at, oh, sorry, Rod, go ahead.
I was just going to bring you in, Curtis. So carry on, then I have a question for you.
No, I was going to say, I think often we initially start looking inward, which is a good thing to do, of course. But I think as we look inward, we need to look at what we've already solidified, right? As you look at what's solidified in the industry, the distributors, as an example, are largely utilized across the ecosystem model. And how you work with distribution and the amount of data they have and you have can lead to significant benefits while still keeping those guardrails that Carlin mentioned. So I was just going to touch on that, well, while we look internally and we need to make sure that there's a security model and there's guardrails, there's a lot of things that are already established relationships that have guardrails around them that we can use to start to expand, as opposed to necessarily thinking what's just within the walls of our organization. So just something I would encourage people to think about. But
Now, ecosystems, one of the things we're seeing, which is a huge challenge for a lot of companies, is as we recognize that more and more people are involved in a sale, how do we compensate everyone? How do we decide who gets what? There's clearly a finite amount of money. There's clearly a danger that both internally and externally, we're having to look at multiple players within that deal. How do we decide, hey, this is your share, this is your share, this is how you're going to get compensated? Curtis, what are you seeing amongst your customers?
yeah, well, it's a really hard question, especially, you take partner, reseller, then you couple it with distributor, and now you got hyperscale marketplaces that are just going crazy, right? And so, and everyone wants to take a piece and a part of that puzzle. I think you really have to find a way to organize yourself and your content and your data, but we also have to look at the effort and to get information that's based on effort, you have to start to look beyond traditional tools and look at things, like Gong and or Chorus or those types of things that are actually recording what's happening within the infrastructure model and see what the real influence of that potential opportunity is. And part of that comes with a very intentional go-to-market motion, right? Of if we're going after a specific play in a specific geography, and I'll use an example with one of the clients we're working with, large AI company trying to drive adoption of their chips in certain industries. They've targeted specific partners with a specific play in a specific geography with very specific incentives. But the way in which they acquire that, be it AWS, distributor, or whatever, that they're starting to separate themselves from that and look at one is the initial opportunity creation. Two is what comes of that sale, how much pipeline is created and then drives to the sale. But three is the renewal cycle and how they stay involved. And I think if we look at that across the entire flow of client support all the way through a renewal cycle, it will vastly change the way that we motivate, incentivize, and create our business models because you cannot function in a world where you just get the initial sale and then you have a 40% drop rate. Retention is absolutely pivotal, and you need to be able to see that through an entire life cycle and ensure it's going to happen no matter where it takes place, including in the hyperscaler marketplaces. So Microsoft made some big announcements at their Inspire conference yesterday, actually, in that regard, to help open up that data set to Matthew's point of where you can really get to that base set of data and track that through an entire model.
Multi-partner selling, and I mean, partner, whatever ecosystem actor you're playing with, is something that will be measured in 2026. We have clients doing it today, and while it's hard, it takes a kind of upsetting the traditional data model. It's doable, and that multi-partner selling recognition is going to be part of the programs of the future. You have to figure out a way to manage it and to incentivize and motivate and compensate each person or each actor in that play.
Yeah, you got to build compensation that reflects the reality, right? And not every deal involves every lever or every layer
Right.
within the organization either, right? So some, are referrals or references, so they kind of bypass that sourcing step, right? Some, have really robust and difficult implementations, right? So that team deserves some sort of, credit, right, for bringing it across the finish line and closing it and actually deploying the solution, right? So I definitely think that everyone's making, solid points, and I think we're going to definitely see a transformation as we head into 2026 and beyond for sure.
Excellent. And James, let me bring you into this one. It's not just the external partners, it's the internal teams. More and more, we're seeing companies struggling with, hey, Direct says they did this. The ISV group said they did this. The partner group said they did this. How do you deal with the internal pressures that you have as far as compensation, attribution, etc. are concerned?
Yeah, so I think again this speaks to the ecosystem shift that we're living through because what's sort of happening in real time is that go to market is transforming to more ecosystem led, right? So we've traditionally had the channel and systems like PRMs, which were designed for the folks over here who do something, with partners, and then you had the direct revenue systems. We're now starting to see the convergence of all of the ecosystem, and truly the unlock of valuation is scale, through ecosystem. And whilst we're not yet there in the mainstream, you see the rise of this every day. So I think one of the key questions there is how do you stop trying to fight the attribution battle over partner influenced versus sales sourced? And it's always been a tricky thing, even internally with sales and marketing, but you start to focus on the motions of ecosystem led growth where you have multiple participants working together. So, for example, if I'm trying to generate truly successful co-sale with one or more partners, that is a very specific ecosystem motion that needs planning, execution, and very precise demand generation and account targeting support to achieve it. And it involves the seller, the partner, maybe multiple partners, others in the, client life cycle. So reward at the motion level, stop putting partners in buckets like MSPs and VARs and OEMs, work out the business goals, get the right folks who are responsible to work together to achieve those business goals, and then reward everybody involved appropriate to the success that you're driving in those motions. And that way of thinking about it changes everything. It actually unifies go-to-market teams as well because everybody's working on the same outcomes and they stop this fight. And I think it was actually a really great channel focus conference. I think it was Rachel Tuller at Autodesk who said this. She regards her team now as ecosystem orchestrators, right? They're not partner managers, they're not, channel managers anymore. They're driving the success of the next era of scale for the company by orchestrating these ecosystem motions. And actually anything going through that motion is partner sourced, right? Because if you're going to a partner's end customer with a joint value proposition that's unlocking revenue, stop worrying who registered the deal. Deal reg is over, right? There's 17 different people involved in every opportunity. You've got to think differently and you've got to build new tech stacks to support those motions.
And Reagan, if I can come to you on this one. So does that mean when we're looking at our ecosystem, we're looking at the infrastructure and the systems, we also need a really robust set of rules of engagement? And how do you go about creating that?
Yes, and yes. The thing that always blows my mind is when we get into an engagement with someone and because they're asking us to do some sort of implementation or configuration, and I say, okay, tell me about your rules of engagement. Like, if this, then what? And they said, we don't need that. I said, you absolutely need that. And then without fail, they'll launch it, and then they'll call me up like 6 months later and say, hey, this just happened. What am I supposed to do? And I said, well, what do your rules of engagement say you're supposed to do? Oh, well, we didn't build that out. Your rules of engagement for any of your programmatical elements and reward structure across anything in your ecosystem have to be well defined. It's a thing that keeps you as a vendor on your toes and in line, and your teams in line, and it keeps your partners in the know and in the understanding of what they're going to get, what they need to do, and how they earn it. And it just makes things fair, and it keeps everyone staying in their lane and with a good understanding. And I think that moving into this multi-partner selling motion that we're seeing more and more and more, those guardrails have to be in place. because you're going to have a situation in which this person says, this actor says, I did this actor says I did that, your internal person said I did this, and what's going to be the deciding factor? It's not going to be we're just going to reward the internal person. It has to be something that's set up, systematized, and managed. And I'll give you an example.
We can't all get paid, Reagan?
Everyone gets paid. Well, you don't want to drive your margin into the toilet either. So you have to look at it holistically. You've got to run models, use AI to run data models around what you can actually pay. We had a client years ago that didn't have guardrails on their lead passing and their deal registration. So the people that were managing the accounts had full access to that. And they had a bad actor. They had a sales rep that saw an opportunity to work the system and pass all the leads to one specific partner. They did this so much so that partner bought them a Mercedes. Okay. And we were talking about millions of dollars in revenue. Well, needless to say, the partner got fired and that person got fired. But the reason that happened was that the pieces of the puzzle were not in place to prevent it from happening, right? People who are compensated against certain activities shouldn't have the ability to make decisions on who gets what. So you've got to put those regulations, those guardrails in place now more than ever, especially as you have multiple people kind of having a seat at the table and taking action. They need a clear idea of what they're going to get compensated on, what constitutes that compensation, and then you always have something to point back to. And it has to be table stakes in the programs of the future and the programs of today.
Excellent. We're almost out of time. In fact, we've run quite long because there's been a lot to cover. I'm going to come through each of you very quickly for some summary. But before I do that, Carlin, the one thing we've missed is ROI and measurement. So very quickly, what are the key elements you need to have in place to judge the success and to measure the success of your ecosystem?
Well, I think it varies, as we've talked about on this call, right? Depending on what your outcomes are and what you're hoping to achieve. But, just some examples from, we talked about revenue influence, deal registrations, pipeline, partner-led marketing engagement. There's operational metrics like, obviously utilization of MDF or other types of incentives that you're throwing at the partners. We talked about depending on, the type of partner and what segment they're in, certification completion might be important, right? And co-marketing activation. Are they taking advantage of the assets and the collateral that's out there? And then are they actually, taking advantage of other types of incentives? So, are they acting on learning credits or training incentives or things like that? So I think there's a variety of ways that you can track the success or the ROI of a partner ecosystem. And I think it kind of rolls back to the overall strategy and what you're trying to accomplish and achieve with your ecosystem. And then I think it continuously needs to be reevaluated on a regular cadence.
Okay. And we're almost out of time, so a minute each for everyone. Curtis, your minute. What is the one thing, if I'm looking at ecosystems, that I really need to focus on?
I would say I'll go back to my comment, get out of the portal frame of mind, get everyone you can in your company on board with the idea that traditional systems are not engineered to support what is happening in this ecosystem space. And if we can work together, collaborate together, we're going to be able to drive that revenue. But we need to get everybody in the company and organization on board with that idea and what the data model needs to look like. Everyone's talking about AI. None of it matters if we can't unify our teams to work together on that information. So get out of the portal frame of mind.
James, same question to you.
Yeah, I think start with the business goals. Absolutely put that as your North Star and focus, right? Really focus. Because I think the challenge, and again, the traditional goal of a PRM or a partner portal was very fluffy, right? It was marketing. We should need an experience for every partner. We should have beautiful landing pages. But that's not the world we're in now. We're in how do we move the needle on the business goals? What are the different pieces of architecture and the blueprints we need to do that? How can we do this at the speed of the business? succeed on something that really impacts the business and then focus on the next priority. Don't try to do all of it. Don't feel your number one goal is rolling out a new program in a partner portal. Start impacting the business and using the tools that can get you there the fastest.
Excellent. And Reagan?
We get asked all the time to benchmark against competitors. I think the biggest thing for me would be to stop looking at everyone else and find the mirror and figure out what you guys need to do as a company, where you're at, where your readiness level is, your maturity level within your ecosystem, and focus in on what your capabilities are to deliver on that. Because when you start looking externally at all your competitors, their ecosystem motion might be completely different from yours. Their maturity level and the readiness level to execute could be completely different. And so you cannot compare to what everyone else is doing. So you've got to dial in on where you're at and start where you can be successful. The likelihood is it's going to be a shorter list of things than you thought, but it's better to start where you can be successful and give the ecosystem players and actors what they need based on where you're at and what you can feed them. Launching a program that has no legs does not make any sense. So my piece of advice would be to stop looking at what everyone else is doing and focus in on what you can do and execute that.
Fabulous. And Colin?
I would reiterate, just operationalizing your ecosystem. So whether that's systematically through kind of deeper integrations or even kind of going through a marketing, technology assessment or audit, because you may have the system in hand today, you just don't know the power of how to leverage it to kind of connect your ecosystem. And I would say the last thing, and something we didn't really hit on that much today, is just enabling your partners. I think that's critical to the success of any ecosystem. And I feel this could be like a segue into your next webinar, Rod.
Colin, Curtis, Reagan, James, thank you very, very much indeed for some great insights, great advice on how to build an ecosystem. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you all for joining. You'll see a survey as you leave the webinar. So please do take a couple of moments just to complete that for us. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.